Well, hello, Nativity Bible heads. It is Dr. Wayne, and it is time for, yeah, that's right, Sunday morning Power Bible Study. I don't know if you're watching at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning or if you're watching it later, or I don't know. Occasionally I'll put a sneak peek on my personal Facebook page, but what I like to do here is actually review all 4 of the lectionary passages for the Sunday that is about. And the first one, so we are now in the 4th Sunday of Epiphany. There's one more Sunday, the 5th Sunday of Epiphany, and then there's the last Sunday before of the Epiphany. That means we're skipping the 6th, 7th, and 8th because the date of Easter is when it is. It means that Epiphany only has 5 Sundays plus the last Sunday. The last Sunday of the Epiphany is always the last Sunday Epiphany, whereas, yeah, this is the 4th, next week is the 5th, the week after is the 6th, or the last. And then we go into Lent. The time of Epiphany is all about the presentation, the manifestation, the appearance of Christ in the world. And even our Old Testament passages are supposed to, they're chosen to reflect a way of, from the Christian aspect, which isn't always the most valuable thing of understanding of the Old Testament, but it is the thing that's most valuable to the church. And our first one is out of the book of Deuteronomy. And in Deuteronomy, the whole book of Deuteronomy is a speech, basically, of Moses to the people before they enter the promised land. Moses does not enter. Everybody else does. Moses does not. So in verse 15, where we begin in Deuteronomy, chapter 18, verse 15, Moses is speaking. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own people. You shall heed such a prophet. It's not difficult to see from those words how the early church could read this and think, oh, well, that was Jesus. Was Moses necessarily talking about Jesus? Probably no. But those words do reflect Moses' own self-understanding as a teacher of God, and the idea that his role is not the end-all be-all. I believe in these words, it presents to us in the narrative flux of everything that, the words that I'm saying, these aren't the last words. So therefore, there will be more words. Very important, because if they were the last words, then basically whatever Christianity would have to offer would not be anything beyond what Judaism had to offer based on what Moses had said. So when he says a prophet like me, in the Hebrew, it could be translated something different, like such prophets, which is another thing, because it's like after Moses, there are many prophets, some of which we are familiar with: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and then Amos and Micah, Hosea, yada yada yada. Could be, but our translators here go with the understanding of it as a prophet. Okay, this fits best from our Christian understanding, simply because of the fact that we identify Jesus as that prophet, after all, right? Notice it says, from among your own people. Again, can you not see how the early church could think, oh yeah, Jesus was one of us, yada yada, okay? So from among your own people, you shall heed such a prophet. Again, how can the early church not think of Jesus and see these words of Moses and say, oh, see, even Moses is saying that we need to listen to Jesus? Because did Matthew in his gospel not present Jesus, yes, he did, as like a second Moses, as remember on the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus says, you have heard it said, but I say, there you go. You shall heed such a prophet. Verse 16, we're in Deuteronomy 18, verse 16. This is what you requested of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly when you said. So Moses is still speaking, and he's saying, you shouldn't be surprised by this, O children of Israel. You shouldn't be surprised that I'm saying what I just said, because back when we were at Mount Sinai, here the word Horeb is used for Mount Sinai. It's a part of the northern tradition. This is what you requested of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly when you said, if I hear the voice of the Lord my God anymore or ever again see this great fire, I will die. This refers to the people's respect for the word of the Lord and the idea that, you know what, there does need to be somebody who has that authority that comes to us. It's like, we can't handle that. We just can't handle it. The idea of we will die is the equivalent of, we can't handle it. We've got to come from somebody that God is going to appoint, which fits into the theology of the early church about, Jesus as the Son of God. The Son of God as the prophet. It's like, okay, now we can handle that, but we can't handle it otherwise. And notice, repeating verse 17, then the Lord replied to me, they are right. Oh, I'm sorry. I was in the middle of verse 16, where the people said, if I hear the voice of the Lord my God anymore, or ever again see this great fire, I will die. The fire was the presence of God. Verse 17, then the Lord replied to me. This is Moses talking again. They are right in what they have said. This is Moses quoting a conversation that he had with God, God speaking. They are right in what they have said. I will raise up a prophet like you from among their own people. Just like Moses just said that to the people. So he's basically saying, I just said to you the words that God already told me, and so now I'm quoting how it sounded when he talked directly to me. That's what's happening. Only he adds, I will put my words in the mouth of the prophet. That's an interesting thing. Remember, the thing about the word prophet could be such prophets, like multiple prophets. And one of the things that the prophet Jeremiah is that we know about him is that he had this experience of eating or having the words of the Lord put into his mouth, and that they actually had a flavor and they tasted good. This is this word about the way the words occur for the prophet. They have a way of it's a way of saying that for the prophet, it's not the words aren't going to taste bad. You know an example of a prophet for whom the words tasted bad? Jonah. Remember Jonah from, I don't know, it was last week or 2 weeks ago? Jonah. Yeah, the words did not taste good to Jonah. Eventually, Jonah came around. But that's how we know. I don't know. Maybe that's why this is the better translation of the prophet. Okay? Because after all, we consider Jonah a prophet, but yet he was not really a prophet. He was more like an anti-prophet. An anti-prophet is like an unwilling prophet. Okay? Okay, all right. We're back to the middle of 18. I will put my words in the mouth of the prophet, who shall speak to them everything that I command. Again, how can we not see the early church reading this and thinking, oh, that's definitely Jesus, right? You've heard it said, but I say. So therefore, the words that, and you know what? If you think about it, John's gospel and the way he portrays Jesus, it's definitely just like this. Like Jesus doesn't say anything that isn't the voice of God, the Father. Anyway, let us continue. Well, and plus, that all speaks to the authority then, does it not, of who Jesus is. So again, remember, this is Epiphany, the manifestation of Christ to the world, the revelation of God to everybody. This is ultimately expressed in the presence of the Christ, of Jesus. Verse 19, anyone who does not heed the words that the prophet shall speak in my name. Now, this is where, so Moses is still quoting what God said, okay? Anyone who does not heed the words that the prophet shall speak in my name, the Lord, I myself will hold accountable. So, there's the idea that it's okay, if you're gonna not speak, if you're gonna speak as a prophet and not be a true prophet, there's gonna be hell to pay, okay? That's just all there is to it. There's gonna be hell to pay. This is what the narrator is saying in the words that he's saying of God to Moses. Verse 20. But any prophet who speaks in the name of other gods, or who presumes to speak in my name a word that I have not commanded the prophet to speak, that prophet shall die. Okay, so when we relate this to the word of Jesus, the church saw in Jesus as being the prophet. And it's how could he speak in the name of any other God? He was the Son of God, so therefore that's not a problem. He couldn't speak in the name of any other God. The idea that if he presumes to speak in the name of the word for God, but yet is not, he shall die. Okay. This is one of the reasons why there was a lot of backlash to the early church's proclamation that the prophet of God, okay, he was killed, but resurrected. That's the reason why there were a lot of people on the side of yeah, but he was killed. So that means that he must have been a false prophet in the end. There you have it. That's the reason why not everybody followed. That thing about death was huge. It was a deal breaker for so many. That's the reason why Paul calls it, a stumbling block for the Jews and foolishness to the Greeks, or one of the stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Greeks and stumbling block to the Jews, something like that. But the idea was well, if he was killed, then there you go. There's your evidence. Yeah, not the Son of God. One of the reasons why the resurrection makes it even more powerful, because, Moses said that prophet shall die if he was false, Jesus did do that. Happened to Jesus, but he was resurrected. So that was the validation of maybe he died, but God negated death. And there you go. That's the reason why the resurrection, that's the reason why the Easter faith, that's the reason why the resurrection changed everything. It transformed everything with regard to the religion of Israel. This is the presentation of the early church. Verse 21. You may say to yourself, how can we recognize a word that the prophet has not spoken? Verse 22. If a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, but the thing does not take place or prove true, it is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. Do not be frightened by it. Actually, these words are going on to another argument about the word. I don't think these are actually contained in our passage. But the idea is that the prophet of the Lord is one who speaks the truth. This is part of the reason why a prophet isn't always saying good things, okay? This is the reason why when Jesus would predict the temple being destroyed, you know, that's one thing that the prophet has to do. He's got to be the bearer of bad news sometimes. Okay, this is all we're going to say about Deuteronomy 18. Now, our next passage is our Psalm 111, which is a hymn to God's great deeds. Praise the Lord. I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart in the company of the upright in the congregation. Great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them. Full of honor and majesty is his work, and his righteousness endures forever. He has gained renown by his wonderful deeds. The Lord is gracious and merciful. So see this, how it kind of applies to Jesus already, or how it applies to the manifestation of God, the showing of God's way in the world through Christ. He has gained renown by his wonderful deeds, okay? In our gospel passage, spoiler alert, in our gospel passage, we're going to be given a couple examples of Jesus' wonderful deeds. Verse 5, he provides food for those who fear him. Okay, this is probably like a reference to the provision of manna in the wilderness. Remember that? And the wilderness time had become for Israel an idealized time when you look back at the past and say like, oh yeah, the wilderness, that's when we really had it right. That was before we had a king. That was even before we even took possession of the land. But yet we were totally dependent on God. And we didn't go wrong, you know, forever then, only after we reached the promised land. So it's like the wilderness became known as a time of, remember how that's when we really did do it right. This is the way, so the provision of food, the mention of food here is a reminder of that. All right. He is ever mindful of his covenant. He has shown his people the power of his works in giving them the heritage of the nations. One of the things that that was in the Semitic mindset was that the corporate identity could be represented in the individual. And the individual of Jesus came to represent the corporate nature of all of Israel, okay? So when he says, you know, showing his people the power of his works and giving them the heritage of the nations, it's like, well, the whole, everybody's seen this. Remember the Magi coming to Jesus? Yeah. What was that about? That was about the nations, okay, recognizing, oh, this King of the Jews is the King of the world. Verse 7 and following in Psalm 111. The works of his hand are faithful and just, and his precepts are trustworthy. They are established forever and ever, to be performed with faithfulness and uprightness. If you think about it, this psalm kind of expresses the mindset that the early church perceived that was in Jesus that allowed him to do what he did. Verse 9, he sent redemption to his people. He has commanded his covenant forever. Holy and awesome is his name. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. All those who practice it have a good understanding. His praise endures forever. Again, this mentioning of wisdom and understanding. The early church understood Jesus as being that one who had all of that. His praise endures forever. Everything that Jesus did was considered to be in the category of giving God praise, because Jesus was always about the Father's work, the work that he had to do. Therefore, he manifested that in its entirety. All right. Now we go to our New Testament passages. The second reading was from 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Now, concerning food sacrificed to idols. Now, okay, in 1 Corinthians, much of the letter, Paul is addressing items that he had been, of concern that had been presented to him via a letter. And frequently he refers to, okay, this is I'm going to now address this thing that you asked. So he's actually going to take like 3 chapters, 8, 9, and 10 to do this. But we're only doing chapter 8. So this is how he introduces this topic from their letter to him. Now, concerning food sacrificed to idols, we know that. And here in quotations, and the New Revised Standard Version is very good about this because we see the quotation marks, and it gives us a clue of like, oh, what Paul is doing here is he's quoting from the letter or quoting from the way the people thought, okay? All of us possess knowledge, okay? Knowledge is a little buzzword because especially when we're dealing with the people in Corinth. Corinth is in Greece, and this is a very the Hellenistic mindset of the philosophies of the day. There were philosophies of knowledge, the idea that there was an exalted knowledge that some people had, and in Corinth, some of these intellectuals, if you were, I don't want to use that as a buzzword or a negative thing, but intellectuals, like, yeah, they felt a little bit more enlightened, like, yeah, we got knowledge, yes, like we have this informant. They were letting their understanding separate themselves from everybody else, like, well, I know what's really going on, so therefore I don't have to worry about anybody but myself. This is very convicting for yours truly. Now, look at this. All of us possess knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Oh, love? Oh, what's love? Well, this is that word agape. This is that word that Paul goes to great lengths to talk about in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. This is just chapter 8. And in chapter 13, he's going to really give us a full exposition. Does he? Oh, my goodness. Does he not? Of love and what love really is. So he plays that card here before he actually fully fills it out in his later elucidation in chapter 13. Okay, now, anyone who claims to know something, again, there's that word know or knowledge, to know something, does not yet have the necessary knowledge. So here he's using knowledge in a couple of ways. It's like, well, you might have that kind of knowledge, but there's another kind of knowledge that you really need that obviously you haven't gotten yet. Paul is very keen to point this out. But anyone who loves God is known by him. Isn't that interesting? Anyone who loves God is known by him. The idea is not that we don't have the task. The task is not to know God. The task is to love. In being love with one another, being love, as opposed to being, oh, I'm smarter than you, which isn't hard to be, God is known by him. So being known by God is actually the goal more than knowing God. And how is one known by God? We experience being known by God when we love. Yeah, right? Meditate on that one for a bit. Verse 4. Hence, as to the eating of food offered to idols. Okay, here's the deal. There were pagan cults that would... temples and places of worship where meat would be offered to a pagan idol, and a public feast would be offered. And a lot of times the wealthy people were invited. And there were many in the church in Corinth who were a part of that sect of the society of that they would actually go to these public eating things. And they knew themselves, oh, well, idols don't really exist. And those gods that they say this food was sacrificed to, that's just made up stuff anyway. So there's really nothing wrong with eating this food. So therefore, they would go ahead and participate in these banquets, in these worship halls of the pagan deities. And Paul is basically addressing, how should we really be about all of that? So going back, chapter 8, verse 4, 1 Corinthians. Hence, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know that, and he quotes here, no idol in the world really exists, and there is no God but one. See, these were the things that the intellectuals who had the knowledge were saying. In verse 5, indeed, even though there may be so-called gods in heaven or on earth, as in fact there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom are all things, and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things and through whom we exist. Remember, the theme of Epiphany is the manifestation of Christ to the world, of God in the world through Christ. And this passage here is probably that little linkage here where it says, the thing about his quoting, this is probably from a little ditty or hymn or, early Christian proverb or saying, where he says, for whom there's one God, the Father, for whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and through whom we exist. Probably quoting a hymn, but because it's not really sound like Pauline language. That's one of the reasons why we might think that. But that's where we get this idea of this is a good passage for Epiphany because it exalts that aspect of who Christ is. Such was. Verse 7. It is not everyone, however, who has this knowledge. So Paul is saying, we know that there's not really any other gods. There's only one God. And so if somebody says that they've sacrificed this food to their God, it's really sacrificed to nothing. Therefore, it's really nothing. It's really neutral. It's not everyone, however, who has this knowledge, he says. Since some have become so accustomed to idols until now, a lot of pagans were converts to the early church, they still think of the food they eat as offered to an idol. So he's saying, just because you have the knowledge of all of the way reality is, there are some people who have come to the church who they might still see that food as bound somehow to that idol. Like they might not have a full understanding of the bigger reality. And their conscience, being weak, is defiled. So it's like he's saying there are some people who aren't at that same level you are, and so they might be a little offended if they see that because they don't know what you know. They're not at that level. And he's going to suggest something here. Food will not bring us close to God. So he's quoting here again from the intellectuals, those who feel they have the knowledge. Something that they're saying is like as a rationalization. It's okay for us to eat food sacrificed to idols because of the fact that food's not going to bring us closer to God anyway. So it's like it's neutral. It's neutral. We are no worse off if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. This is probably still a quotation of them, even though it might not be quoted like that in our New Revised Standard Version. Verse 9, Paul is speaking here. But take care. This is where he gets down to the teaching point. But take care that this liberty of yours, the word liberty is kind of in the sense of libertineness, okay? The idea of I can do anything I want. But take care that this liberty of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. Paul is suggesting that our sense of understanding, even though it might be accurate, and it might, because of the fact that some other people aren't there, we might need to take them into consideration in what we do. But take care that this liberty verse does not somehow become a stumbling block for the weak. Verse 10, for if others see you who possess knowledge eating in the temple of an idol, might they not, since their conscience is weak, be encouraged to the point of eating food sacrificed to idols? Paul is suggesting that it is possible that they are giving the people who aren't at their level of understanding creating a problem for them if they're known to be doing this. Verse 11. So by your knowledge, those weak believers for whom Christ died are destroyed. But when you thus sin against members of your own family, and would their conscience, when it is weak, you sin against, let's say this again, verse 12. But when you thus sin against members of your family, and wound their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. So Paul is saying that it's like, we've got to take responsibility for the entire community here. We can't just say, well, I understand what it is, and if they don't get it, then on them. Paul is saying, no, if we're not taking into consideration everybody, then we're actually sinning against Christ. This fits into our theme of Epiphany in the sense that all of us are a witness for Christ in the world. And if what our actions are doing is reflect badly or weaken another part of the body of Christ, if you will, then we aren't totally being the manifestation of Christ in the world. Therefore, verse 13, last verse, therefore, if food is a cause of their falling, I will never eat meat, so that I may not cause one of them to fall. Paul is just basically saying, so I'm not going to do that. Just so you know, how does this all sit for me? I'm not going to do it. I don't think you should do it either. But for me, I realized, if I really do care about those who aren't where I'm at, then I should take that into consideration. This is very convicting, especially in a world where there's so many different choices for people, and for whom a lot of different opinions exist around certain substances that people can take in their body, their food, liquid or otherwise. There's a lot going on here, if you know what I'm saying. Very difficult. I don't have a whole lot of guidance for you there, because I just want to point it out that this is the guidance of Scripture, and we've got to sort it out for ourselves. I can't tell you how that looks for you. I have to struggle with it for myself, how it looks for me, right? All right. Now, last but not least is our passage from the Gospel. And I'm not just going to spend a ton of time on this, because I try to keep these studies in less than 40 minutes. I only have about 6.5 minutes to go. Okay, so in chapter 1, we are starting in verse 29. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. This is talking about Jesus and his disciples, right? Now, Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, which is interesting if you think about it, because if Simon's got a mother-in-law, then Simon was definitely married. And if Simon was married, then, wasn't Simon the first pope? Yeah, that's right. So you know how there's that tradition of the monastic tradition of not marrying, and that the popes can't be married. Well, Peter was. Okay. Now, Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with fever, and they told him about her at once. Verse 31. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. So Jesus is one of these, he doesn't let some things in the law, those peripheral things of the law, stop him from being who he's supposed to be with regard to being the Christ. You're not supposed to touch women, not in public, okay? Jesus' willingness to forego these things points to his behavior teaches us something about, you got to keep the main thing, and the peripheral things, you got to reevaluate the peripheral things, basically. Verse 31. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her. Notice it doesn't say anything about why or how. He doesn't utter any words. It's just he offered her a hand and lifted her up. So there was obviously something valuable in the touch. We're not sure if the touch was even necessary, but the interaction, the intention of Jesus, the presentation of Jesus as an exorcist, as a healer. This passage in Mark is intended to simply portray Jesus as this. This is a typical day in the life of Jesus. A typical day in the life of Jesus. And here we see him as a healer and teacher. Again, Epiphany is about what? Manifestation. How Jesus shows himself, how the Christ manifests God in the world, bringing healing, bringing wholeness. This is what he's doing. He came and took her by the hand, lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. The word for serve doesn't necessarily mean that she got them dinner or whatever. It's the same word that we have later on in the gospel that describes various other women who weren't men. Specifically, the other verse I'm talking about refers to other women who used to support Jesus' ministry. And it doesn't necessarily mean, they cooked them dinner. It could mean financial support, okay? So I just want to get that clear, that serve does not necessarily mean cooked them dinner or provided food. It could be something much more of financial means or some sort of supporting the ministry and the ongoing spread of the gospel. Verse 32, that evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. One of the themes of Mark's gospel is that the only people all the way through, the only creatures, I guess you'd say, the only entities that truly know who Jesus is are those in the spirit world. And the disciples don't really see it, but yet in the crucifixion in the Gospel of Mark, the Roman centurion says, "Oh, truly, this man was the Son of God." The disciples are not as keen on recognizing who Jesus is like those in the spirit world were. This is a theme that we have in Mark. This is an example in verse 34 of chapter 1, is an example of that. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." Now, this thing about a deserted place, remember that little thing I said earlier about the time of the people being in the wilderness, the children of Israel, was kind of like this idealized time, this time when this is when they really got it right. The depiction of Jesus being by himself in a deserted place, it kind of brings up that wilderness imagery. We see it elsewhere. We're going to come to it again at another time, specifically during Lent. Okay, this is reminiscent of that. Remember, Jesus was the individual who represented the corporate whole of Israel. He went to a deserted place. He answered, Let us go on to the neighboring towns so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do. So so what he's presented with is, hey, there's a lot of demand for you right now. And Jesus is saying, I got what I got to do. There's what I got to do. And I can't respond to that right now because I got something else. For that is what I came out to do. Out to do. Verse 39, last verse. And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. So the theme of Epiphany, the manifestation of God, the presentation of God, God getting the word out into the world. Mark's passage here is kind of like a little day in the life of Jesus of, yeah, this is how that happened. Casting out demons as an exorcist and as a teacher. And as one who would seek God in the lonely place, in the wilderness. This is oftentimes where we find God if we are only bold enough to enter it, to seek it out, to take the time to do that. Okay. That is it for our Power Bible Study Sunday morning. Have a blessed week, and we'll see you next week. Peace.